Okay, the role of epigenetics. You know, when I first came to Berkeley in the 60s and I was taking Biology 101, it was at the very beginning of the discovery of the DNA, of the genetic code. And that was, we thought, was the answer to everything in our lives. But what has only recently been discovered, uncovered, is the role of epigenetics in transgenerational trauma. And if we look at a review of the literature, existing literature, this has become a viable research method in the field of medicine and the social sciences. This last year, I had the enjoyment, the pleasure of teaching together, this was in Switzerland, with one of the chief investigators of epigenetics. So the idea is you have the DNA, but what determines what of that part of the DNA is expressed is the epigenome, the things that block certain gene expression and enhance certain gene expressions. You know, I mean, even if you think about this, anywhere in our bodies, in our skin, in our liver, in our eyes, in our hair, in our all of our organs, somehow we have the same DNA in all of those organs, but obviously they're expressed very differently. Well, this kind of goes on in this direction, and that epigenetics is really not only a scientific explanation to the existing metaphysical theories of how constellations of families work, that include not just the epigene, but what Rupert Sheldrake calls morphic fields or morphic resonance. And morphic fields are informational fields that are passed on to, well, I'll give you an example from Sheldrake's early studies. And this was a study that was done many, many years ago. It was really the beginning of his study of morphic fields. A group of rats or mice were taught a maze, and this occurred in Sydney, Australia. And it takes a while, and then the mice get to learn how to find the cheese at the end of the maze. Then the same species of mice in New York City at the Rockefeller Institute, I think, they also were given the same maze. Now, they never knew the other mice. They were bred in New York. And when they did the mice, but they're the same strain, and they, with it very slightly but significantly sufficient, they learned that maze in a less time than the Australian. And you say, well, everything's fast in New York. Yeah, that's probably true. But when the opposite was done, when the mice learned the maze in New York, then the mice in Sydney of the same strain also had that advantage. So something's being transmitted that goes beyond epigenetics. As important as epigenetics are, there's more to our understanding. And indigenous and tribal people, I think, have a better understanding of this. My very, very dear friend, SE teacher, Efu, she comes from an indigenous tribal peoples where this knowledge is embodied and passed on. Okay. The constellation facilitator, Albrecht Maurer, German guy, lovely man, coined the phrase, the knowing field. And he suggests the field carries information from the ancestors to individuals to the present. So while trauma can be passed on, so can important information, life-saving information can also be passed on. And morphic fields, using again Sheldrake's term, are organizing fields of animal and human behaviors, mental activities, and and or social and cultural systems and contain inherent memories that are shaped by the influences of previous generations. Sheldrake, 1981. When I started working with people in the 70s, it became clear to me that trauma was passed on from generations, but so was wisdom. And this came to me first when I was working with this woman who was in an airplane crash and many people were killed. She did survive. And as in somatic experiencing, we go to the positive aspect first, which was when she was in the cornfield, sitting with the sun on her back, feeling the sun, feeling the warmth. And then in doing that, then I was able to bring her back into the piece of the fuselage and she was upside down. And she gradually could let herself down to the bottom, which was previously the roof. And everything was black. And she had no idea what direction to go. And then she hears the following words: Katie, go to the light, go to the light. So she looked and she saw this pinpoint of light. And she started crawling towards that pinpoint. And in doing that, she escaped and escaped and then was in the field feeling the sun. Okay, so where did that come from? Well, it turns out both her father and her grandfather, both of them, were in airplane crashes. One was a commercial flight and the other was a military flight. And they both escaped by going to the light. So you can say, well, maybe they told her this story. Well, maybe they did. But still, in that moment, that information came to her, that morphic field came to her, and she was able to save her life. And actually, somebody else also that was in the plane that followed her. And so for us, that might seem a little bit far-fetched. But with indigenous and tribal peoples, this is a known way of knowing. And one of my faculty, one of the SD faculty, her name is Efu Niaki. That's her Niaki tribe. And she comes from a tribal people in the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. And as she was growing up, she observed the ancestors' wisdom and how to cope with situations in everyday life. Efu also noticed that the ancestors' wisdom is always connected to the natural world. So great wisdom comes from so-called primitive people, but I would emphasize so-called. Yeah. And how do we move from hauntings to wholeness? And from somatic experiencing, we have the knowledge that when a traumatic experience is not yet healed, it will continue to perpetuate itself in the nervous system, in the brain, in the body, in the mind, in the psyche, where often a person keeps on attracting similar experiences. Freud called that reenactment. And he thought that it was maybe because we would keep attracting similar situations as a way of working through our traumas. There may be some truth to that, but I think it's mostly not accurate. When we've had trauma, when we've been, particularly developmental trauma, early chronic developmental trauma, we find ourselves attracting similar experiences, similar people over and over. And I think it's because the nervous system, comes from chaos theory. The nervous system is chaos is a strange attractor in chaos theory. And we continue to attract others that have a similar vortex of energy. And until we have that change in ourselves, then we will continually find ourselves in these situations similar situations with people who have similarities. And when we tell stories of our ancestors and focusing on the suffering, on pain, our nervous system continues to hold the traumatic energy. Yeah. Yeah. Making the invisible visible. In practicing the principles of trauma-informed awareness, like somatic experiencing, and then through that developing a deeper connection to our body, and in the here and now, we can break these patterns of trauma, but also can reconnect or connect deeper with the wisdom from our ancestors. And as we break these patterns in order to live a healthier, more joyful, happier life, and a more fulfilled life. And I think this is the gift that we can give to ourselves and to our clients and to our friends and our colleagues, really. So from hauntings to wholeness, it's not going to be easy, but as we learn to create or recreate resourceful images of our caregivers and ancestors, and disconnecting from the victim image, from the victim identification, we begin to experience different sensations of wellness, connection, and being. And while feeling well, we may begin to remember other healing experiences from our caregivers and ancestors and others in our lives, which embody the connections that were good. And this is from an image from Efu, and how we pass down from generation to generation, learning experiences and care. And when we look at our origins with open eyes, open mind, and open heart, we can begin to let go of that which does not serve our past personal growth. Instead, we gain strength, we gain resilience, as we acknowledge our ancestors' pain and connect to the energy field of their authentic self, of our creator. We then can release them from their pain and release our pain, and particularly our early developmental pain, beginning in utero and going through the first 6 years of our life.